He inherited a house from his late Mafia father, whom he had hated all his life. But when he went inside, he realized that everything he knew about him was a lie. Look what this house was hiding. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and write in the comments which city you're from. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, folded with bureaucratic precision, sealed with the emblem of a law firm Michael Ross didn't recognize. It sat on his kitchen counter for hours before he opened it, beside a half-finished cup of coffee that had gone cold long before he found the courage to tear through the paper. The words were simple, almost clinical. His aunt, Agnes Ross, had passed away 3 weeks earlier, leaving him the last remaining property under the Ross family name. Beneath that, a line in smaller print. The property is located at 11 Maple Hollow Road, Brookfield County. Michael stared at the address, reading it again and again, as if it were written in a language he had forgotten. He hadn't seen that place in 25 years. It was his father's house, the same man he had sworn never to speak of again. His throat tightened at the thought, the same old bitterness crawling up like a taste of iron. He pushed the letter aside, telling himself it didn't matter. He had no intention of going back. The past was buried, and he had spent most of his life making sure it stayed that way. He lived alone in a small, one-bedroom house near the edge of town. His days followed the same rhythm. Wake at 6, drive to the construction site, check the foundations, drink cheap coffee, drive home, heat up leftovers, fall asleep to the static of the TV. It wasn't happiness, but it was peace. Peace, at least, until the letter came. That night, he left it on the kitchen table, pretending not to care, though he caught himself glancing at it every time he passed by. At midnight, he poured himself a drink and read it again. By the third reading, the words had changed shape, not in what they said, but in what they implied. There was something inevitable about them, like a door he had spent years keeping shut, and now found slightly ajar. The law firm's name, Harper & Bell Associates, stirred a faint memory. They had handled his father's affairs after the trial, before the man vanished from the public eye, and, later, from life itself. No grave, no obituary, just silence. When his aunt's name appeared on the envelope, it felt like the past itself had reached out to him, as if the old house had been waiting for someone to return and listen. He told himself he was only going to settle the paperwork, a quick visit, a signature, a sale. He needed the money anyway. The mortgage had been pressing on him like an unspoken accusation. The next morning, he packed a small bag and got into his truck before dawn, telling no one where he was going. The highway stretched endlessly north, winding between leafless trees and frozen fields. Late winter sunlight slid across the windshield, and his reflection looked older than he remembered. Tired, unshaven, with the faintest trace of something he refused to name. Fear. The radio played static. Every now and then, an old country song broke through, the kind his father used to hum after long nights. He switched it off and drove in silence. By noon, the skyline of Brookfield appeared, a town half forgotten by time. Boarded storefronts, faded gas stations, faces that looked older than they should. People still recognized the name Ross. He saw it in the way eyes lingered a moment too long. In the diner where he stopped for coffee, the waitress hesitated before asking, "Any relation to Victor Ross?" He lied. "No." Too quickly. She only nodded, but he saw something tighten in her jaw. The law office was on Main Street, in an old brick building with blinds half drawn. Mr. Bell, the attorney, was a small man with nervous hands and an expression of mild pity. "Your aunt wanted the house to stay in the family," he said, adjusting his glasses. "She never sold it after your father's passing. I suppose she thought someone might come back for it one day." Michael almost laughed. "She was wrong." "Maybe," the lawyer replied quietly. "But sometimes Places remember us even when we try to forget them. He handed over a ring of keys, 3 large iron ones, and a smaller brass one that didn't seem to fit. Front gate, main door, and whatever else she locked away. The drive to Maple Hollow Road took him through the outskirts of town, where the streets gave way to narrow dirt paths and tangled weeds. The house came into view just as the sun began to lower. It stood on a hill, wrapped in wild ivy, its stone wall streaked with decades of rain. The iron gates were rusted, and when he pushed them open, the sound echoed down the empty road like a groan from something waking up. For a long time, he just stood there. The house seemed to look back at him. It was the same one he had run from as a boy, the same that filled his nightmares through college, the house where voices used to rise behind closed doors, where the smell of smoke and expensive whiskey never faded, where his mother's laughter had slowly turned into silence. He walked toward the porch. The boards creaked under his boots, brittle with age. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the faint scent of tobacco. Sheets covered the furniture like shrouds. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the boarded windows, cutting the room into long stripes of gold and shadow. On the mantel above the cold fireplace sat an old photograph. Him as a child between his parents, his father's arm around him, his mother smiling softly. But someone had taken a knife to the picture, slicing out both parental faces, leaving only the boy in the middle, staring out alone. Something in his chest twisted. He turned away, went room to room, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The kitchen was untouched, dishes still in the sink, a bottle of scotch half full on the counter. In the study, he noticed a faint smell of cigar smoke, though no one had lived here in years. On the desk lay a single envelope with his name written in his father's unmistakable handwriting. Sharp, deliberate, heavy-handed. His fingers trembled as he opened it. "You thought I was gone. You thought you left me behind. But the house remembers. If you want the truth, you'll have to earn it. The key will take you below." It was signed simply, VR. Beneath the note, taped to the paper, was a small black key. For a while he just sat there, staring at it. Then, with a mix of anger and curiosity, he stood and began searching the house. He found the door to the basement behind the kitchen stairs, its handle corroded with rust. The black key slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting for his hand. The door opened with a groan. A breath of cold, stale air rose to meet him. The basement was not the cluttered storage space he expected. It was almost bare. The walls were reinforced concrete, the ceiling low, the air damp. In the corner stood a metal shelf lined with tapes, dozens of them, labeled by date, stacked in perfect order. A small tape recorder sat beside them, covered in dust. Michael wiped the dust off, turned it over. It still worked. One cassette, labeled "For You," rested inside. He hesitated for a long time before pressing play. A voice filled the room. It was unmistakable deep, slow, the tone of command that could make grown men freeze. But it wasn't the voice of a man giving orders. It was quieter, weaker, tired. "Michael," it said, "if you're hearing this, then I'm long gone. And if you've come back here, it means you're not done with me, no matter what you tell yourself." Michael's knees went weak. He sat down on an overturned crate, staring at the gray concrete wall. The voice continued, "You hated what I was. Maybe you were right to. I took everything that should have been yours and turned it into poison. But I didn't build this house to hide my crimes. I built it to bury them." There was a pause, then the faint scratch of a chair moving across the floor, the soft exhale of a man running out of breath. "I know you'll never forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me either. But if you want the truth, it's here, behind the wall in my office. I couldn't destroy what I needed to. Maybe you can." Then the tape clicked and went silent. Michael sat for a long time in the dim basement, listening to the faint hum of the old machine. He felt something shifting inside him, not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the hard wall he had built around everything that bore his father's name. He climbed the stairs slowly. The light in the hallway had grown dim, dusk pressed against the windows. In his father's office, he began searching the walls. It took him nearly an hour to notice a faint seam beneath the wallpaper behind the desk. He ran his hand along it, feeling the uneven surface. Under the old carpet, a square section of floor sounded hollow. He pried it open with a screwdriver he found in a drawer. The panel lifted easily, revealing a narrow space between the walls. Inside was a small safe and a faded photograph of his mother. She was smiling in the picture, sitting on the porch steps with a book in her lap. He remembered that day. He must have been 9 or 10. His father wasn't in the photo, but Michael could almost sense him there, watching from the shadows. The safe was unlocked. Inside were letters, old photographs, and another tape labeled "She Knew." He didn't play it. Not yet. Instead, he unfolded one of the letters, written in his mother's hand. "You can't build a temple out of blood, Vic. You can't raise a child inside a cage. He'll carry your sins whether he wants to or not." The words blurred as his eyes filled. He sat on the floor, surrounded by dust and paper ghosts, while the last light of day died across the walls. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to tick. Slowly, steadily. He hadn't seen any clock running when he arrived. For the first time in 25 years, Michael Ross didn't feel alone in his father's house. He stayed there until the night swallowed everything, and the sound of that clock echoed through the halls like a pulse, returning to a long, dead heart. Morning came reluctantly, as if the light itself hesitated to enter the house. Michael woke in the chair beside his father's desk, his neck stiff, his head heavy. The old photograph of his mother still lay on the carpet beside the open safe, and the faint ticking of the unseen clock echoed somewhere deep in the walls. For a moment he didn't remember where he was. The smell of dust and the silence pressing around him brought it back like a blow. He rubbed his face, stood up, and looked around the room. Nothing had changed, yet it felt different. Less like a ruin, and more like something waiting for him to make the next move. He poured a glass of water from the kitchen tap, which coughed and spat before giving in, the taste metallic from disuse. The house was old enough to feel alive, breathing faintly through the pipes and creaks of the floorboards. He told himself that he was only imagining things, that fatigue and too many memories were playing tricks on him. But when he looked toward the office again, the sense of someone unseen watching him didn't fade. By afternoon, he forced himself back to the basement. The air down there was colder than before, the shadows deep enough to feel thick in the corners. He found the tape labeled "She Knew" lying on the desk beside the player. He hesitated. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the idea of hearing his mother's name spoken by his father, or the possibility that she had been part of everything he'd run from. Finally, he pressed play. The voice that came through was quieter this time, weaker, but unmistakable. "She knew everything before I did," the voice said. "Your mother could see the rot long before I admitted it. I thought I could protect you by keeping her silent. I was wrong." There was a pause, a long inhale that cracked in the middle. "You remember the night you left? The storm. She begged me to let you go. She said if you stayed, you'd become like me. She was right again. I wanted to build something that lasted, and all I built was fear." Michael turned off the tape halfway through, unable to listen further. He leaned against the concrete wall, breathing hard. His mother's voice lived again inside his memory. Soft, steady, a sound that once made everything in the world feel safe. He could almost hear her calling him from the garden, asking him to help water the flowers before dinner. The ache in his chest felt like something breaking open, something old and sharp. He climbed upstairs, opened every window he could, and let the light flood in. The house had spent too long in darkness. Dust shimmered in the sunbeams, curling like smoke. For the first time, the air smelled faintly of life again. But the peace didn't last. That evening, when he stepped outside to check the front gate, he saw a car parked down the road. An old gray Chevrolet, engine off, 2 men sitting inside. They didn't look at him directly, but he felt their gaze all the same. When he turned back toward the house, the car door opened. By the time he faced it again, the headlights blinked on, and the car rolled slowly away. The next morning, a brick lay in the grass near the front steps. Attached to it was a torn scrap of paper. The handwriting was rough, angry. Sell the house. Forget the tapes. Don't dig up the dead. Michael stood for a long time with the note in his hand. There was a time when fear would have sent him back to the city without looking back, but that time was gone. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, more out of defiance than caution. Someone wanted this house silent, and if his father's voice had taught him anything, it was that silence had always been the family's real disease. He went into town that afternoon, driving through the narrow streets where he used to ride his bike as a boy. People looked up when they saw him, some with curiosity, others with unease. In a hardware store, the owner froze when he heard the name, Ross. Michael pretended not to notice. On his way out, he stopped by the local police station, a small brick building with cracked glass windows. The officer at the front desk was an older man with gray hair and a badge that had lost its shine. "What can I do for you?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. "I'm staying at my father's old house, on Maple Hollow," Michael said. "Someone left a threat at my door." The man's eyes shifted slightly. "Maple Hollow. You're Victor Ross's boy." Michael didn't answer. The officer sighed, leaned back in his chair. "Listen, son, that house has bad bones. Every year someone thinks they can fix it, or sell it, or dig something up. It never ends well. If you're smart, you'll lock it and leave." "I'm not here for long," Michael lied. "Good," the officer said, "because nothing buried in that place should ever see daylight again." The words followed him all the way home. The car that had been there the previous night was gone, but its tire tracks carved long scars in the gravel. That evening, the air felt heavier. He walked the halls, listening to the quiet. Somewhere above him, the beams groaned as if under invisible weight. He tried to distract himself by cleaning the study, sorting the piles of paper, but every page led him deeper into his father's shadow. Some of the documents were financial ledgers, names, numbers, amounts. Others looked like coded lists, initials written beside columns of figures. When he opened the bottom drawer of the desk, a faint metallic click startled him. Inside, beneath a false panel, was a folded sheet of paper and a name scrawled across it. Thomas Delane. A number was written below. He found the courage to call it after 3 glasses of whiskey. The phone rang long enough for him to think no one would answer, and then a slow, hoarse voice broke through. "Who's asking?" "My name is Michael Ross," he said carefully. "I think you knew my father." The silence on the line was so long he thought the man had hung up. Then the voice came again, softer now. "You shouldn't have called. Not from that house." "I found your name in his things," Michael said. "I think he trusted you." Another pause, then a sigh. "I was his accountant, a long time ago. Where are you now?" Michael told him. The voice cursed under its breath. "Stay put. I'll come by tomorrow morning. Don't open the door for anyone else." The line went dead. Michael didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every whisper of wind sounded like footsteps. Once, near dawn, he heard a thump from the basement, but when he went down to check, nothing had moved. The tapes still sat neatly on the shelf, the player silent. He turned off the light and climbed back upstairs. The next day, an old man appeared at the gate just after sunrise. He wore a dark overcoat and a hat pulled low over his brow. When he stepped into the sunlight, Michael saw eyes that looked carved from exhaustion. "You're him," the man said. "You've got your mother's eyes." Michael didn't answer. "You're Thomas Delane?" The old man nodded. "Your father and I built half this city together. Not the buildings. Those came later. I mean the things that ran under it. The roads no one talked about." He looked toward the house. He wanted to burn it all before he died. Couldn't do it. Too much guilt. Not enough courage. They went inside. Thomas moved through the rooms, as though walking through a cemetery. "He kept everything," he muttered. "Every deal, every payoff, every mistake." In the study, he pointed to the floor beneath the desk. "There's more below. A room he built himself. Said only blood could open it." "Blood?" Michael frowned. "His words, not mine. You're his blood, aren't you?" Thomas led him to the basement. The man's hand shook as he traced the wall. "Here," he said finally, touching a faint metallic outline. In the center of it was a square of polished steel, dulled with dust, a handprint. "Try it." Michael pressed his palm against it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft click echoed inside the wall. The seam shuddered and split, opening like a mouth. Cold air poured out. Behind the panel lay a narrow room lined with shelves. The light from the basement bulb barely reached inside. Thomas found an old lamp and lit it, the flame trembling. Papers filled the shelves folders, ledgers, photographs, tape reels. On the far table sat a small wooden box engraved with the Ross family crest. Michael opened it slowly. Inside were old receipts, marked with unfamiliar names, and pages of handwritten notes. At first they looked like ordinary accounting records payments, shipments, transfers, but the more he read, the less sense they made. Some lines were written in shorthand, others in code. One phrase repeated again and again. "For the children." "What is this?" he asked. Thomas rubbed his forehead. "Your father was funding something. A place, maybe. He told me it was his penance. He used the money from the business to build a shelter for kids, ones he couldn't save from his own world." Michael flipped through the pages. Amid the donations and transactions, there were darker entries, lists of names, marked paid, some crossed out in red ink. He realized they weren't payments. They were debts, lives traded like currency. He looked at Thomas, whose expression was unreadable. "Why tell me this now?" "Because they'll come for you," the old man said quietly. "They always come for whoever finds what he left behind. He was trying to destroy them when they killed him." "Who?" "Everyone who still runs this city." That night, the wind rose and the house moaned against it. Michael tried to sleep, but the sound of the tapes echoed in his head, his father's confessions, his mother's warnings. Around midnight, the lights flickered. Somewhere outside, gravel crunched under tires. He moved to the window. 2 men were standing near the gate, silhouettes against the dim streetlight. One of them pointed toward the house. The other shook his head. Then, slowly, they walked away. At 3 a.m, glass shattered in the hallway. Michael grabbed the first thing he could, a broken chair leg, and ran from his room. Shadows moved downstairs. He caught a glimpse of one man's face before the darkness swallowed it. Pale, tense, eyes wide with purpose. He stumbled back toward the basement, thinking only of the narrow room and the thick steel door. The generator in the corner still worked. He had tested it earlier. He slammed his hand against the switch as he closed the hidden wall behind him. The lights roared to life, buzzing with electric heat. A high-pitched alarm blared, a sound that rattled the whole foundation. Footsteps thundered above. Then, silence. When he finally dared to emerge, dawn was breaking. The front door hung open. The wind had scattered papers across the floor. The men were gone. He sank into the nearest chair, trembling. The alarm had stopped, but the faint hum of the generator remained, a pulse, steady and alive. The trap, he realized, had been built for this. His father had wired the house to protect itself, or to protect him. Outside, the pale morning light fell across the driveway, washing away the night's terror. The note, the car, the intruders, all reminders that the past refused to stay buried. He knew then that his father's story was far from over. The house wasn't done speaking, and neither was he. Michael looked at the open doorway, the cold air streaming through it, and whispered to no one in particular. "You wanted me to finish it, didn't you?" Somewhere deep inside the walls, a clock began ticking again. Slow, deliberate, as if in answer. The morning after the break-in, the world outside looked unchanged, but the air inside the house felt different, charged, alive, as though the walls themselves were aware of what had happened. Michael moved slowly through each room, studying the shattered glass, the scattered papers, the overturned chair in the hallway. Every footprint on the dusty floor felt like an accusation. He could still hear the alarm ringing in his memory, the metallic scream that had sent those men running. The thought that his father had designed such a defense was strangely comforting. It meant the man had been preparing for something, or someone. It meant that even in death, Victor Ross had been thinking ahead. Michael spent the day cleaning, collecting the fallen documents from the floor, reshelving the ledgers, and burning the torn pages that bore no meaning. He found himself treating the work almost reverently, as though he were piecing together fragments of an unfinished confession. Outside, the sun rose high and cold, washing the old stone house in pale light. He hadn't slept in nearly 2 nights, but he didn't feel tired. It was as if the house itself was feeding him some quiet determination. By late afternoon, he sat at the desk with the last of the undamaged tapes spread before him. He hadn't touched them since the night of the attack. The top one was labeled The End. His fingers hovered over it for several seconds before he slid it into the player and pressed play. "Michael," came the voice, calm but frayed around the edges. "If you're still listening, then maybe you've already seen what I left. Maybe you even understand why I couldn't finish it. The men who will come for this, they built their lives on blood, same as I did. The difference is, I was tired of the taste." The voice broke, a brief cough followed by a long silence. Then it continued. "You've always been better than me. I knew that the day you looked at me like I was something you couldn't stand to see. I used to hate that look. Now I think it was the only honest thing between us. If you want to do what I couldn't, then take what's left of me and make it something that matters. Make this place mean something more than a grave." The tape clicked and ended. Michael sat there long after the machine stopped humming. His father's words echoed in his mind, not as a plea, but as a command. The idea of transforming this house from a place of corruption into one of purpose began to take shape, fragile and unsteady, like the first breath of a wounded thing. That evening, he drove back into town and found an old contact from his college years, a journalist named Emily Shaw. She had once written a piece about his father's trial, though the paper had killed it before publication. Her address was listed in an outdated directory, but when he knocked on her apartment door, she answered herself. Her hair was gray now, her expression wary. "Michael Ross," she said, as though testing the name against her memory. "I never thought you'd come looking for me." "I need help," he said simply. "I have evidence. Proof that my father wasn't what they said he was, at least, not entirely." She let him in, though suspicion lingered in her eyes. Over cheap coffee at her kitchen table, he told her everything: the tapes, the documents, the attack. He didn't embellish or dramatize. He spoke like a man reporting weather. When he finished, Emily sat back and rubbed her temples. "You realize what you're talking about would tear this town apart," she said quietly. "Some of the names on those ledgers, they're still in office. Still powerful." "I'm not trying to ruin anyone," Michael said. "I'm trying to finish something my father started." "Redemption?" she asked, her tone halfway between disbelief and pity. "Truth," he said, "whatever's left of it." After a long silence, she agreed to help him sort through the materials. They spent days in the dim light of her apartment, listening to tapes, comparing notes, cross-checking financial records with public archives. What emerged was not the story of a criminal seeking forgiveness, but of a man trying to dismantle his own empire before it devoured him entirely. The donations, the coded entries marked "for the children," the hidden funds, all pointed to something real. On the fourth night, as they worked through the last of the ledgers, Emily looked up from her notes. "He wasn't just laundering money," she said. "He was building something, a foundation, the Ross Trust. It's still registered as inactive." Michael felt a chill run through him. "He was going to build a shelter," he whispered. "A home for kids who got caught in the system because of people like him." "And now you have everything you need to prove it," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then we publish." The next morning, Emily sent the first draft of the article to her old editor. The reply came within an hour. "We're not touching this story. Too dangerous." Undeterred, she sent it to 3 more outlets. The fourth one responded with interest, asking for verification. That same night, she received a phone call from an unlisted number. The voice on the other end was calm, male, and cold. "Tell Ross to stop digging," the voice said, "or we'll finish what we started." Emily's hands shook as she hung up. She told Michael everything, but he refused to stop. "They're scared," he said. "That means we're close." 2 days later, the story went live. It ran under the title "The Last Confession of Victor Ross." The article included photographs of the tapes, excerpts of transcribed conversations, and a detailed outline of the hidden accounts tied to several prominent figures. Within hours, it was everywhere, shared, debated, condemned. The town that had spent decades pretending to forget the name, Ross, suddenly couldn't stop speaking it. The reactions came quickly. The police reopened the old investigation. City Hall held an emergency press conference denying all accusations. Anonymous sources came forward claiming to have worked under Victor's orders, half of them corroborating the evidence, the other half calling it fabrication. Michael didn't care. The truth was out, and that was enough. But the night after publication, someone slashed the tires on his truck. A window shattered in the front hall. Emily's phone was flooded with threats. When she called him, her voice trembled. "They won't stop until you're gone," she said. He looked around the house, the thick stone walls, the hollow corridors, the ticking clock. "They've already been here," he said. And they failed. Over the next week, the chaos began to settle. The authorities, pressured by public outrage, raided several offices, seized financial records, and suspended multiple officials. For the first time in decades, Brookfield felt something like reckoning. Michael kept out of the spotlight, refusing interviews, letting the storm burn itself out. Yet beneath the relief was an ache he couldn't quiet. He hadn't done this for revenge or recognition. He had done it because his father's last words had asked him to give meaning to what remained. One night, unable to sleep, he returned to the basement. The generator still hummed softly, a constant reminder of that violent night. He walked past the shelves until his hand brushed against a section of the wall that felt hollow. The plaster was newer there, smoother than the rest. He pressed against it, and a small panel shifted open, revealing a narrow recess. Inside sat another safe smaller, sealed with a simple latch. A single phrase was carved above it. A house is not its walls, but the lives within them. The latch turned easily. Inside were legal documents, land deeds, bank statements, and a handwritten note. If someone finds this, let it be you. The money in these accounts belongs to no one. I meant it for those who have nowhere else to go. Finish the house, Michael. Make it theirs. He stared at the papers for a long time, then laughed, a soft, broken sound. It was all there, enough money to restore the property, to transform it into something new. The foundation his father had dreamed of could finally exist. In the following months, he worked tirelessly. He hired contractors, cleared the overgrown garden, repaired the broken windows, and repainted the peeling walls. The locals watched from a distance at first, suspicious. But when they saw what he was doing, some began to help. Carpenters offered their labor. A retired teacher volunteered to design the learning space. Donations arrived in envelopes with no return addresses. Slowly, the house that had once been a monument to fear became a place of hope. By autumn, the work was finished. The front gate bore a new sign, the Ross Home for Renewal. On the day of its opening, the air was cool and clear. Reporters came, cameras flashed, but Michael barely noticed. He stood on the steps, speaking quietly to the small crowd. My father built this house out of fear and control, he said. He believed power could protect what he loved. He was wrong, but he left me something more valuable than power, a chance to make this place mean something. I hope it will stand as a reminder that redemption isn't a word, it's a choice. The applause that followed was gentle, respectful. Among the crowd were children from the foster network, volunteers, townspeople who had once crossed the street to avoid him. The house behind him gleamed in the sunlight, its windows open wide. That evening, after everyone had gone, Michael walked through the halls in silence. The room smelled of fresh paint and new wood, of life. In the old study, where his father's desk still stood, he found the last tape he hadn't played, one marked simply with a date. He placed it in the recorder, pressed play, and sat back. The voice was barely a whisper. If you're hearing this, it means you did what I couldn't. Maybe you hate me. Maybe you should. But if you turned this place into something good, then it's enough. You've broken the circle. You've given it back its soul. Michael turned off the recorder and leaned back in the chair. Through the window, he could see the lights of the city beyond the trees, flickering faintly. The house was quiet now, not the kind of silence that felt heavy, but the kind that came after a long breath, when everything at last settles into peace. He closed his eyes, listening to the steady ticking of the old clock. Somewhere deep inside the walls, it sounded slower now, softer, as if content. Outside, laughter drifted faintly from the garden, where children would play tomorrow. For the first time in his life, the name Ross no longer felt like a curse. He whispered into the stillness, "It's done, Dad." The wind moved gently through the open windows, carrying the scent of fresh earth and new beginnings. The house did not answer, yet somehow, Michael knew it was listening. And as the last light of evening spread across the room, it seemed to him that the house itself was smiling. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Watch the other videos on the channel. Each one hides something you haven't seen yet. And share this video so more people can discover it.